everybody, and welcome to our Sculpt Masterclass. And we're going to be making Greek vases today. It's really lovely to meet you all. If you have done a Sculpt class before, you might have potentially met Rose, my colleague who did the jug class recently, but my name is Ellie. I'm one of the resident potters at Sculpt. So just to go over a few things before we get started, just so everybody's up to scratch. First of all, I can't see you guys, unfortunately. I wish I could, but I can see the chat box. So throughout the session, if you do have any questions or you need me to go back and repeat a step, you can just pop them in the chat box and I will get back to you out loud, of course. Okay, so before we get started, there's a few things that you guys are going to need to grab, and I'll just go through those now so you're all set up, ready to go. First of all, of course, we need our Sculpt kits. Some of you guys might have slightly different kits, so some of you guys might just have the clay, but a few others will have the whole kit, so you'll have tools, brushes, etc. So I will be using a few of the pieces in the full kit. If you don't have them, that's fine. For the tools, you can just grab things like a knife from the kitchen. For the sponge, of course, you could just grab a sponge from your kitchen. And for the paintbrushes, if you do have a paintbrush lying around at home, that's perfect. If you don't, you can just use your fingers, that's also fine. Okay, so the extra things you're going to need to grab that aren't in the kit. First of all, a small bowl or mug of water, or any kind of vessel of water is great. Secondly, of course, we're going to need a surface to work onto. So a wooden chopping board is 10 out of 10 if you do have one, just because clay doesn't stick that much to wood, so that's perfect. If you don't have a wooden chopping board, don't stress, you can use whatever you want. But if you do find that the clay starts to stick, I would recommend popping down a sheet of baking paper or any kind of non-stick paper. And then the last thing we're going to need is a tool to roll the clay out with. So I've got a rolling pin here from home. If you guys have a rolling pin, that's perfect. If you don't have a rolling pin, you could grab a bottle of wine, a can of beer, a tin of soup, a water bottle, a glass, anything like that. Anything's perfect. So you can go foraging now. I'll give you a couple seconds. So just to reiterate, that's water, wooden chopping board, and a rolling pin, and we're good to go. So we've just had a question from Amy saying, can the host of the meeting mute everyone? Would that be okay? Sorry guys, I wish you could all have a chat, but it's probably a bit distracting for everybody if you can't really hear the instructions. Okay, so quickly I'm just going to chat a bit about how the clay works. So if you guys have never used our clay before, you're completely up to scratch with the process. So first of all, of course, we're going to be making our piece. And then once your piece is finished, you have to leave them to dry for about 2 to 3 days before you can decorate them. So all the clay needs to dry out solid is just contact with air, which does sound kind of silly, but as long as it's not wrapped up in a bag or put away in a box, the piece will dry out. Having said that, if you get halfway through your piece and you decide you want to carry on another day or maybe next week, you can use that tip. You can wrap it up in a bag, like a reusable sandwich bag, pop it in a Tupperware, and then it won't actually dry out beyond the stage you leave it at. So you can come back next week and carry on working on it. Okay, so the nature of air dry clay, unfortunately, is that it's never 100% waterproof. So there's a couple different things you guys can do to get around this. So first of all, the sealant in your kits is great for helping to keep it a bit waterproof. Secondly, if you want to use these as fresh flower vases, so obviously they will need a lot of water, you can pop a little lining inside, like a plastic bag, squash that in, and then put your fresh flowers inside the bag. And also you can get your pieces fired in a kiln if you wish to do so. So there are instructions on the back of the packet about that. And also you can head to our website or just ask us any questions over email. We'll get back to you about firing in a kiln. Right, so let's get started. Just a few example pieces so you guys have an image in mind of what we're going to be making. So these are our lovely Greek vases. It's up to you guys how big you want your vase to be. So I am going to use a whole bag of clay for mine, or I'll try and use the whole bag of clay. I might have a few bits left over at the end, but that's fine. If you want to make a smaller one, of course, go for half a bag of clay, 2/3 of a bag. If you want to make a beast of a Greek vase, use both the bags. That's completely fine. It's up to you guys. So just going to get started and dive in. Now, so for the main body of the vase, we are going to need to use 2/3 of the bag if you're using the whole bag. And we're going to need another third left over on the side for the neck and for the handles. So I am just going to tear off the top third and pop that aside. So again, if you guys are using half the bag, then wrap the other half back up, put it away for later, and then tear off a third from the lump that you're using, if that makes any sense. And then to make the body of the vase, what we're going to be doing is making 2 equal-sized pinch pots and joining them together to make a hollow ball. So if you guys have done the jug class, you potentially will know this step already, so you'll be pros. Okay, so what we're going to do here is just tear the clay in half. And if one of the halves looks a little bit bigger than the other, you can transfer some clay over. We want to make sure that they're quite equal before we get started, as this is going to make our lives a little bit easier later on. Then you can pop one aside, and we're just going to work on one of the bags, or one of the balls, sorry, at the moment. So with the ball of clay, or the lump of clay, what we want to do is turn this into a nice, smooth, round ball. So you can do this by rolling it in your hands. You can roll it down on the table. This is great if you do have any deep cracks or anything like that. You can also transfer it between your hands, give it a bit of a squash, play around with it. Now, to make this into a pinch pot, we have to turn it from a ball into a cup shape. And to do that, we first have to make the entrance or the opening of the pinch pot. So from your round balls, what we're now going to do is press our thumb about 2/3 of the way into the center. You want to make sure you're pressing it parallel to the sides. We're not going at a diagonal angle or anything. So you press your thumb 2/3 of the way into the ball, and then we're going to twist our thumb around so that the hole is not thumb-shaped, because we don't want it to be wonky. So yeah, you press your thumb in, and then you twist your thumb around. And now we're going to start pinching the sides of the wall to turn it from a ball with a hole in it to a pot shape. So just very gently, we're pinching between our thumb and the rest of our fingers, and we're rotating the ball around to build up the shape. And you want to come up around the top, and you can also reach down to the bottom. And we want to make sure that we're not going too thin with the walls, just so that our vases still have a bit of strength in them. So I wouldn't go any thinner than about 1 centimetre thick. Okay, don't worry as well if the walls of your pot are looking quite bumpy or messy, because once we've made the ball, that's going to be the body of our vase, we'll smooth it all down and make it look quite neat. Great, and once again, guys, if you do need me to repeat anything or you have any questions, I'm checking the chat box, so I can answer anything that you need over there. So if you can see now, we're getting a little bit closer to the shape of like a small succulent pot. Just gradually doing it. You don't want to get one part of the wall too thin, because then you'll be in a bit of a rush to catch up the rest, and it probably will end up a little bit wonky. Okay, and then once we've finished the first pinch pot, we're gonna take the second lump of clay, and we're turning that into an equal-sized pinch pot. And we want to try and make sure that they're as similar in size as we can get them, because we're going to be attaching the two together like this. So the main thing you want to look out for is that the circumference of the rim is the same width. So it's fine if the second pinch pot is a bit taller or shorter, as long as the circumference of the rim matches up, and that way you should quite easily be able to attach them together. Okay, so that's my first pinch pot done now. It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're going to be changing the shape quite a lot. So just to reiterate with this one, we made a ball, we pressed our thumb into the middle, we twisted the ball around our thumb, and we've started squeezing and pinching the walls to make this shape. And also, we're still early days with this vase at the moment, but if you guys do find that you're trying to follow the steps that I'm doing and it's just not working with any bit of the pot or the vase, The best thing about clay is that you can just crush it back straight into a ball and start again at any point, and that's completely fine. It won't start drying out for at least 24 hours, so it is so fine for you guys if you just want to crush it back and start again. If it does feel a little firmer, because it will start to dry out a little bit, you can just dip your fingers in some water and knead the water into the clay, and that will bring the moisture back in and make it easier to use. Okay, so hopefully everybody has a pinch pot that looks a little bit like this. It's fine if it's a bit different, doesn't matter, they don't all have to look exactly the same. And you just want to pop that aside for a second and grab the second ball of clay. So we're going to do exactly the same thing with this. And as I was saying a second ago, the aim here is that we want to try and make the circumference of the top of the pinch pots, or the rim of the pinch pots, match up and be the same size. Okay, so we've got a question. How do you avoid ridges between your fingers? I'm going to assume the question about ridges is potentially about the outside of the pot, maybe, about all the finger marks. So yeah, it's fine at the moment if you get ridges, if you get lumps or bumps, that really doesn't matter at the moment. We're going to smooth those all out in a second. Again, if you get your fingers stuck in it, if you've got long nails, don't stress, because we'll be using a couple different things in a second, a couple different methods to smooth it all out. Okay, so again with the second pinch pot, made a round ball, tried to get it as smooth as possible. Pressed my thumb about 2/3 of the way in, twisted it around my thumb, and now I'm just pinching the walls again, and I'm going to try and get them the same size. So Becky's asking, ball 1 is 1/3 of the bag, ball 2 is 2/3 of the bag, and then the last third, which I've got here, so if you guys can't see that, that is for the neck of the vase and for the handles. Your clay, okay, so we've got a comment saying the clay is cracking quite a bit as you do this. That's completely fine if the clay's cracking. I don't know if it's picking up on the camera, but mine is as well around the top. That's just because it's stretching. We're changing the shape of it. Once we've made the shape, we'll go back and we'll slide some water over with our fingers or with a sponge, depending on which kit you guys have. And that will help to fill in and smooth out any of the cracks. So don't worry about any imperfections like cracks or fingernail marks or anything like that at this stage. We'll do all of that at the end. So each of the pots Ellie's working on. I see there's a bit of a debate going on about, sorry if I've got my maths wrong, guys. I feel like okay, different thickness in the edge or walls of the pinch pot. Okay, yeah, so we do want, Tiffany, we do want to try and make sure that the walls are about an equal thickness the whole way around. So one way that you can do this is, as you're going, you want to feel where the slightly thicker parts are and give those a bit more of a pinch than the rest. There are a couple other nifty tricks that you can do to try and even out the thickness. I wouldn't attempt this if your pots are a bit flimsy, but one way you can do is to get it down on the table and press your finger towards the table and roll it gently whilst applying a small amount of pressure. In this way, you'll be able to feel where the slightly thicker bits are, and it should help you get rid of them. This also, if you are just making a standalone pinch pot for a succulent or something like that, this would help you smooth out the surface a lot. So it's quite a good trick to know. Yeah, so you can do that with both your pots if you want to just feel where the slightly thicker parts are. Okay, and Emily said hers look awful. That's fine if they look awful, Emily. You can just try again, start again, crush them back into balls, give it another shot. But if you've given up, that's also fine. Right, okay, so hopefully everybody has 2 pinch pots now, which are a similar size. Let me know if you guys need a little bit more time with that. The next step is that we are going to start to join our pinch pots together. So this is why we need them to be the same width around the circumference, so that when they join together, we need more time. That's completely all right. I'll show you guys some other ways that you can smooth out your pots whilst other people need a little bit more time. So as I was showing earlier, one way to smooth them out is to get them on the table, again, if you guys missed this, and you can just apply a light amount of pressure down towards the table and roll them slowly. If your pots feel a bit flimsy, and that potentially could end up breaking them or be a bit precarious, another way that you can smooth them out is to grab the crescent knife tool. If you guys don't have a toolkit because you haven't got the full kit, that's fine. You could grab a knife from your kitchen, anything which just has a smooth edge to it. A spoon even would work. Top tip for all the tools as well, I like to dip them in water before I use them, just because they glide a bit smoother onto the clay. So yeah, so one way that you can smooth them out without rolling them on the table is to grab your crescent knife tool. You can turn the pots upside down on the table as well if it makes it easier for you. And you can just smooth the tool over the outside of the pot. And this should help to get rid of any of the finger grooves where you've grabbed it, or smooth out any nail markings or anything. Okay, so hopefully you guys have catched up. Let me know again if you need me to go back and repeat anything. But the next step is that we're going to join the two pots together. So first of all, before we just stick them together, we need to prepare the top rim of one of the pots. You can do this to both of them, but at the same time, it's not that necessary. You can just do it to one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently start to pinch around the outside of the pot. And the aim here is that we want to pinch the clay and twist it outwards a bit. So we end up with clay sort of stuck out round the sides. And this clay that we've pulled outwards is going to be what helps us blend the two pots together. So I'm just going to pinch it and pull it outwards with my fingers. And one way to know that you guys have got this right, so as you're going, you'll probably make a bit of a petal effect. Looks quite pretty. You'll see that it looks like that, so a bit like petals. Another way, when you turn it upside down, you'll see the extra clay is stuck out round the side. And this is the clay that we're going to use to blend out and connect the two pots together. So once again, just to go over that for everyone, I've pinched it between my thumb and my finger, and I've just pulled the clay outwards a little bit, just so that I have extra clay to help blend the two pots together. And then you can just go ahead and stick them together. So just gently, you don't want to press them too much because we don't want to change the shape. I'd pop them on top of each other, give them a spin to see that they're lined up evenly. And the way that you guys know that you've got this right, so I do this sometimes in the masterclasses that we do, and I've had a couple people say either it looks like a stuffed ravioli, and a very overstuffed ravioli, or like some kind of wacky flying saucer spaceship. And so if it looks anything like this, then you guys are on the right tracks, don't stress. And then very simply, the next thing we're going to do is just blend that rim down or up, whichever way you're holding it, onto the next pot. So this is going to create our hollow circular structure, which is going to end up being the base of our Greek vases. So I'm just doing this with my finger. If you fancy doing it with one of your tools or a knife from your kitchen or something, you can also do that. But at this stage, just using your fingers is fine. Also, the clay that you guys have should be quite moist at the moment, so we don't need to use too much water just yet. If you guys have had your clay for quite a while, then you might find that water does help just to smooth it all out a bit if it's feeling a bit firmer. Okay, so I've smoothed the excess clay around the side, the seam. I've smoothed that down onto the bottom pot. I'm just going back around to make sure that it's completely sealed shut and airtight. And so the reason we do this, sorry guys if I haven't made this very clear, But the reason we do this is to trap the air inside, so that when we form the Greek vase, when we want to form the base, the air that's trapped inside is going to help to support the structure, which is why it's better to do it this way around rather than with a hole in the top to start off with. Because if there's a hole there, then there's a risk that because the structure is quite large, it might start to collapse or flop down. So it's quite handy at this stage to have the air trapped inside just to support the vase. And from here, we're going to start to shape it into this kind of shape. So we're going to give it slightly diagonal straight walls and a bit wider around the top, with obviously a straight base and a slightly flatter top to make it more of a Greek shape or Greek vase shape. How do I smooth the seam out better? Okay, so once you've smoothed it around with your fingers, Kathy, if it's still not smoothing out that well, you could grab one of your tools. You can smooth it in a couple different directions. So rather than just smoothing it down, you could smooth it from side to side as well. Again, if your clay isn't very fresh, if you've had it for a while, you can just add a little bit of water onto the clay, which will help it blend a little bit easier. When joining the pinch pots, the pot is collapsing on itself. Okay, so that is a problem. So I would recommend maybe, Nicole, potentially, I'm really sorry because I can't see it. It's quite hard to tell what the problem is. But the problem could potentially be that the walls might be a little bit too thin to support the second pinch pot. Or it could be that one of the rims is a bit wider than the other. I'm really sorry. Potentially, if that's what's happening, you might want to redo one of the pinch pots just to make sure that they're the same shape. Also, if you guys have any cracks or holes, you can just grab extra clay from the bag and patch those up from the outside if they're just small. Okay, so the next step is that we are going to turn our potato into something that looks a little bit more elegant. And the way to do this, again, we're going to use our work surface and we're going to roll it on the table, which can be a little bit risky. So I would be very gentle with it, especially if your clay is very moist, if you've just got it straight out the bag. So my clay is extremely moist right now. So I'm going to be quite careful and delicate with it. So what you want to do is, first of all, we want to get a slightly flatter, wider top to the vase. So I'm going to turn it upside down and I'm just going to roll around the top just to make the top a bit flatter and a bit wider. So I've just flattened down the top a little bit. I'm going to go back and do the top again in a second once I've done the sides. And what we want to do to get these sort of diagonal straight edges that come up and out is that you want to turn your pot on its side at a slight angle. So you've got it diagonal to the table. And we're just going to gently roll it onto the table at this angle instead of, you don't want to be rolling it straight because then you'll get straight walls and it will turn into a cylinder. You want to roll it slightly at an angle and make sure you're going all the way around the pot. So if you need to pick it up and turn it over. So yeah, this is where, if your pot is quite delicate, this is where you need to be a bit careful. If you do have any cracks showing up, you can just patch them over a little bit. You can use some water if you need to, just to make sure that it is strong. Joe's asking, will you be releasing this as a video? We will be, yeah, we will be releasing this as a video. So if it doesn't go well for you guys this time, you can rewatch it as many times as you need. So if you can see now, I'm just very slowly and gradually starting to get the shape of the slightly rounded diagonal sides. I want to bring the top down a bit more, so I'm just going to roll on the sides of the top to make it a bit flatter, a bit rounder at the top. And again as well, so This technique works to make the base of the pot loads of different shapes. So if you guys preferred to make it more of a cylinder shape than this sort of diagonal shape, you could roll it straight on its sides if you wanted. If you wanted to make the pot taller or smaller, you can roll it on the side and apply a bit more pressure, which will obviously stretch the pot in different ways. What if you get a hole? So if you get a whole hazel, again, so I would try and patch it up if you can from the outside. So grab some extra clay and patch up that hole. So one way that you can actually incorporate the hole as well, if the hole's near the top, then you can put that in a place. You can try and relocate the pot by rolling it on the table and moving the hole so let's say if the hole's on the side, we can try and turn the pot round, and so that the hole will eventually end up being where we place our hole for the top of the pot. If it's a really bad hole, I'm very sorry, you might have to start again. But let's hope that you can manage to sort it without having to start again. Okay, again, I'm just gonna keep rolling it until it's a good shape. If you guys start to have any little cracks showing up on the side, that's fine. We're stretching the clay at the moment, so it will start to change shape and crack a little bit in places just on the surface. We're going to go ahead in a bit and smooth that all out with a sponge, so don't stress too much if that is the case. Okay, again, so I'm rolling it flat on the top to bring the top down and make it a bit flatter, and then rolling it at a diagonal on the side. Okay, so hopefully everybody has a shape that looks a little bit like this now. I'm not really sure what you would call it, but a little bit like this. So you've got a slightly thinner base and a wider top, and the walls are at a diagonal angle. If you want to smooth it out now, if you have got loads of cracks, you can grab a sponge. If you don't have the full kit, you could grab a sponge from the kitchen, and you can just lightly go over any cracks that you have on the side. Right, okay, so here we've got a direct message from Tori. If you want to, recap how to roll it, of course. So we just want to be quite delicate with it. We want to make sure you're not pressing too hard, just because, as a few people have found already, unfortunately, you might get a few cracks and holes. So we just want to be really delicate. First of all, we want to get the sides. So you want to roll it on the table, but not flat on its sides, because then you'll get straight a cylindrical shape. You want to roll it slightly diagonally like this. And then once you're happy with the sides, you can then go ahead and roll it on the top. But when you roll it on the top, I would flatten it out a little bit so that the top isn't as tall. And it's a bit wider at the top. Hopefully that helped, Tori. Okay, yeah, so everyone else as well, if you've got any cracks, we can just go over them with the sponge. The next step is that we are going to be piercing a hole in the top. And then after we pierce the hole in the top in the center, we're going to be making the top neck for the pot. So hopefully everybody's ready for the next step. Let me know again if you want me to go back and repeat anything, or if you need any more time. Okay, so to make a hole in the top of the pot, if you guys do have your toolkits, my favorite tool to do this is the needle tool, which is the wooden pointy tool. It looks like a needle or a pencil, I suppose. If you don't have this, you could just use a knife from your kitchen or anything that's sharp and pointy at all. So first of all, we're going to want to locate where the center is at the top. So I'm just going to place a little hole and check that I'm happy with that. Yeah, that's basically the center. And then if you are using this tool, the best way of doing it is lightly place it in the hole. I'm using the slightly wider end instead of the thinner end. And I'm just going to start to spin it in my fingers like this, almost using it like a drill or something. And I'm just spinning it down until I pierce a hole in the center. So you guys will want to go down, so you might feel a bit of resistance because as you flatten down the top of the pot, the clay there might be quite thick. So you need to just keep going until you feel the give, and you'll feel it go down into the air bubble in the middle, and that's when you're through. Again, if you're using a knife or something, I would just use exactly the same motion. Just spin it round between your fingers and pierce a hole. And hopefully everybody's got that. And the next step is that as we bring the tool back up, we want to widen the hole a bit. So if you guys can see, I've got a really narrow hole at the moment, and I just want to make that a bit wider because obviously we want the neck to be wide enough to be able to put things in. So as I'm bringing the tool back up, I'm going to hold on to the base and I'm going to spin it like this. And that should open up the hole, make it a little bit wider for me. You can just keep going until you're happy with the width. So if you guys wanted to use your Greek vases as a candle holder or something, then you might want to keep a really narrow hole at the top. But of course, if you want it to be a vase for flowers or anything like that, then you're probably going to want to widen the hole a fair amount. Don't worry if you get any cracks around the top. That's quite normal again when you're stretching the clay. We're going to be putting a neck on top anyway, so you won't see those. But if you do want to just tidy them up, you could dip your finger in some water and just smooth the water around the top. Also, this is a great way of making the hole a bit bigger as well. If you have a spun pottery on a wheel, it's kind of a similar concept. You just want to smooth the water around the top and just widen the hole that way. Okay, so hopefully everybody has the base looking like this. And now we're finished with the base. So we are going to get our final third of clay that we popped aside at the start. And we're going to start to make the additional bits to go on top so that it looks a bit more elegant and a bit more like an actual Greek vase. So I'm going to move ahead to the next step now, just because we need to have time to do all of the steps, but that's fine. If you need me to repeat anything, please let me know again. So for the neck of the vase, the way that we're going to do this is we are going to use our rolling pin or whatever rolling tool that you've grabbed, and we are going to roll out a thin rectangle of clay, and then we're going to turn that rectangle, we're going to bring the ends together and turn it into a cylinder, and then we're going to be sticking that on top. Okay, so once you guys have finished the base, we're then just going to grab the rest of the clay from the bag. So if you guys want to just have a second to pop your base aside and grab another handful of clay, just a small one. When we roll it out, we're going to cut out the rectangle. So the excess you can add back into your little pile of spare clay as well. So it doesn't matter too much if you're running out of clay at the moment. Okay, so I'm just going to move ahead to making the neck of the vase. So once again, you've got the remaining third of clay. I've just torn off about half of it. We won't really need all of this. It's probably a bit much. But once we've cut out the rectangle, it's fine. We'll just add the rest of the clay back into the pile. And this is where you guys are going to need your rolling pins. So if you want to go grab a rolling pin if you haven't already, or anything similar, a bottle of wine, we're going to start to roll this out flat. So we're going to roll it out until it's about 1/2 centimeter thick. Once again, you guys might find, because the clay is quite sticky, if you've just taken it out of the bag, it might end up sticking a little bit to your table or to the rolling pin. If this is happening, you could grab some non-stick paper like baking paper, anything like that, and place it down on the table or place it between the clay and the rolling pin, and that will stop it from sticking to anything. And okay, so I've just grabbed a little handful and I've squashed it into a bit of a rectangle just to get the ball rolling. I'm going to grab my rolling pin and start rolling that out. And as I was saying, because it does get quite sticky, if it does stick to anything, every couple rolls, I would just, if it's stuck to the table, just give it a little lift, turn it over. If it's stuck to the rolling pin, you can do the same thing. And we want to be rolling this until it's about 1/2 centimeter into a rectangle. And if you guys go too thin at any point, you can just add the ends back on top of each other and start rolling again. How did you make the whole bit at the top stand up? Thank you, Beth. It's my mum's. Stand up. So it doesn't really matter about the height at the moment. We honestly don't need it to stand up. So we're going to be adding the neck on top of it. So it's fine if it's completely flat, if you haven't got a bit of a lip. That's not really, it's not really supposed to happen anyway. So that's fine, don't worry about that. Okay, so again, I'm just rolling out this piece of clay until it's about 1/2 centimeter thick in a rectangular shape. And once you guys are happy with the shape of it and it's not stuck to the table, which is key, we can then start to just square off the ends so that it's a nice, crisp, clean rectangle. It's not like raggedy at the edges. So the way you want to do this is grab a knife. Again, because I'm using the wooden tool, I'm going to dip it in some water first. And then you just want to go and slice off both sides and the top and the bottom. So if you guys find that you're not very good at slicing a straight line, you can grab a ruler if you need to. So I've just sliced it into a rectangle. So again, we rolled it out and now I've just squared off the edges. Now quite carefully, we're going to lift it off the table. So if it is stuck, the best way of lifting it off the table is just sliding a knife under one corner and just prising it up a little bit. And from this, we are going to spin it together and join the two ends. So when you join the two ends together, we're going to need to bring our base back in front of us, because we want the neck to be about the right width for the base. So if you add the two ends together and it's much too wide, you can open it out again and slice it, trim it off so that it's a bit narrower. Roughly what length should it be and how high? Oh, that's a very difficult question, Sarah. So it will completely depend how wide the hole is at the top of your pot. So it's kind of hard for me to guess that, because unfortunately I can't see you. But once you've sliced it, I would go on the thicker side or the wider side, go on the slightly bigger side. And then you can roll it into a cylinder, put it on the pot, see if it's too big, and always trim it down to size. It's better to be on the wider side so you can trim it than make it too small, if you know what I mean. I'm just going to tidy it up a little bit with my sponge. So if you do have any cracks or it's a bit messy, you can just go ahead and fill those in with a tiny bit of water. But I would recommend not using too much water, just because it will get quite slimy and it will be a little bit difficult for you guys to hold on to and manage. Okay, so the next step now, we're going to completely join the two ends together. So to do this, you want to just match them up. I'm going to do it the other way just because I've not sliced it very straightly. So I'm just going to match up the two ends like this. And because my clay is still super wet, I can just blend it with my finger. If you guys find that that's not blending too well for you, you can dip your finger in some water and blend it that way. Another good way of blending it is, again, with a tool. So you can get a tool and just blend the clay into the join. If you can get inside as well, that's super handy, because then you know it's definitely completely stuck together. If you guys need to grab some extra clay just to patch it up in any places, that's fine, just to reinforce it, because it might be a little bit weak where the two sides meet. And then choose which side is going to be the top of your vase, and you can just start to smooth that down a little bit, because that side's obviously going to be visible. So I'm just going to smooth it with my tool, just so it looks a bit neater. And again, you can always add some water just to smooth everything out and make it look a bit better. Okay, so just to go over those steps again for everyone that is potentially behind. I grabbed a small handful of clay and I rolled that out into a rectangle that was about 1/2 centimetre thick. Then I grabbed my knife tool, again it can be a knife or any kind of sharp tool, and I just squared off the edges of the rectangle so that it's nice and sharp. Then we've brought the two ends together to make this cylinder shape, and this is going to be the neck of our vase. And so the next step is that we are going to attach this to the body of the vase, so that we have a nice smooth transition from the neck into the body. So the first way of doing this, I would get a little bit of water into the join, just so that it's definitely stuck together. So you can smooth some water around the top with your finger. You can also smooth some water onto the bottom of the neck. Then you literally are just going to want to position it in place and press it down onto the neck. So obviously it's going to look a little bit bizarre at the moment because it's just a neck sat on top of the base, but we're going to add some extra clay and blend it all together so that there's a nice smooth transition. Okay, yeah, so just to go over that again, so we've just added some water around the body of the vase, added some water around the neck, and just plop the neck on top of the vase, hopefully in place. Give it a spin to check that it's not off center, which mine might potentially be. And the way that we're going to connect the neck into the vase is, first of all, we're going to add a bit of extra clay that we will be able to blend in both directions so that the neck is fully connected to the vase. Again, please let me know if you need me to repeat anything or slow down. So to do this, I've just grabbed a really, really tiny handful and I'm going to roll this into a tiny little coil, so like a small little snake. And you don't need to do it this way. You can just break off bits of clay and go around and patch it up in places. But I'm just going to make one small little coil so I can wrap it all the way around and have that to connect the neck to the base. So I'm just rolling it on the table in my fingertips. You can roll it in your hands as well if that works better. So once you guys have your little coil, the next thing we're going to do is just drape that all the way around the neck, the very base of the neck. And you can trim it if that's a bit too long, so I'm just going to trim it here. Okay, and then we're going to use this to blend out to connect the neck to the base. So first of all, I'm just going to put some water all the way around it. So you can do this with your finger, or I quite like to use a paintbrush because that's a bit more precise when you're adding water onto the vase. And I'm just going to gently start to blend it out with my fingers, using that water. So again, once you've wrapped the coil around the base, you're just going to put loads of water on it and then start to slowly blend it out. So once you've wrapped the coil around the base, again, if you've blended it out with your fingers, you can blend it out with any of the tools as well if you prefer to do that. So you can just gently blend using the side of the knife tool to connect the neck to the body of the vase. And you can also blend it up as well, just to get rid of any of the little grooves, and so you can't see that coil that you initially wrapped around. If you guys are at this stage, you can just keep on working on making it nice and smooth and neat. You can use the sponge or anything that you've got lying around just to get a really nice surface before we put the handles on, and to let everyone else catch up, of course, as well. So if you guys do have paintbrushes, these work really, really well. You can dip them in water and get a nice, smooth blend on the side of your vase. Also, if you guys have put the neck on and it's a little bit too tall, there's a couple of different ways that you can shorten the neck or play around with the height of the neck, just so that it's how you want it. So the best tool for this is the ribbon tool, which is the tool with the 2 metal wire ends. So this tool is really great for trimming off clay or for digging down into the pot to remove any clay. If you wanted to make the hole wider, you could use the ribbon tool to make the hole wider. So the way it works is that you drag it through the clay like this. It's quite satisfying, and you can peel bits off. So if you wanted to, if the neck was too tall, you could use the ribbon tool just to trim down the top of the neck, if that's what you wanted to do. You can also use this tool, this one's really nice if you want to do any pattern carving. So if you wanted to carve any little patterns on the side of your vase, I would suggest leaving it to dry out for a couple of hours before you do that, probably at least 6 hours. And then you can use the ribbon tool and just dig out little indentations, which looks really nice. It's sort of more of an abstract look. There's actually a video on our Instagram if you guys wanted to do that. Tiffany, I've discovered my base and neck are all lopsided. Sorry about that, Tiffany. I mean, you could say that it's an abstract vase. It's modern art. Okay, so the next step is that we are going to be attaching the handles. So we'll talk everyone through that before I start. So if you are still on the last step, you can carry on with that. The way that we are going to be making the handles is that we are going to be rolling out 2 equal length and thickness coils, if that makes sense. So 2 coils of an equal thickness, which will be here. We're going to trim them down to size and then shape them into sort of C shapes and attach them coming out from the neck to the base. Okay, again as well, once you've added the neck, because it will be a little bit heavy, if your vase starts to squash down a little bit, you can go back to the step we did earlier where you roll it on the table just to make sure that you've got that nice shape still in the walls of the vase. And another tip as well, if you leave your vases to dry out for like 12 hours, you can come back and do this again later on, and that will help to give a really, really smooth finish to your vase just before you leave it to dry before you decorate it. All right, so the next step is we're going to make our handles. And these are probably the fiddliest bit. So if you guys find that the handles are a little bit too fiddly for you, you can modify them a few ways. You can make them a bit chunkier. You can leave them out altogether. I mean, you've got a vase at the end of the day, so the handles aren't 100% a necessity. So first of all, again, we need to roll out our coils. And you're going to need quite a small amount of clay for this. You'll probably overestimate how much you need. I always do. So I've just grabbed a really small amount, and I'm going to squeeze this into a bit of a sausage and get that down on my surface. And I'm going to start to roll this thinner. So we want to roll this until it's pretty, really thin. Probably I'd say this is probably about 1 centimeter in thickness, maybe a little bit more. So that's kind of what you're aiming for. But again, it's fine if you guys want slightly thicker handles. And the best way of rolling out your coil, because this can be a little bit tricky, is to roll it quite delicately and lightly in your fingers instead of in the palms of your hand. So we literally just want to roll it in our fingers. Instead of squashing the coil to make it thinner, I recommend moving your hands apart and stretching the coil, just because that way you avoid getting all the indentations where you've pressed down and squashed the coil and you get little lumps, because you want it to be an even thickness the whole way. So again, so I'm just rolling it until it's a bit thicker than 1 centimeter. And if yours isn't long enough to cut in half and make 2, you can grab another handful of clay and roll out another coil alongside it. But if you've managed to roll quite a long one, then you can just chop that in half, so that you can use either side for your handles. So hopefully everyone's got that step. Again, just to go over the rolling if anyone's struggling, because sometimes when you're rolling it, you get like flat sides start to form and corners and things, which is really frustrating. So you want to just roll it delicately in your fingertips, especially because it's quite a thin piece of clay, and stretch the coil, try to stretch it instead of squashing it. Once you have your 2 even length coils, we're then going to bend these into C shapes or little handle shapes. So I'm just bending it until it's a bit of it's an arch shape, like a rainbow. I'm going to try and make sure that I've got them about the same. And because everyone has a slightly different size vase, I won't be able to say specifically how big you want these to be. So I would recommend just getting them on the vase and checking them that they're not enormously too big. So mine are actually looking really quite big, so I'm going to trim them down to size a little bit. So again, also it helps if you want to square off both of the ends, just like we did when we were making the neck of the vase. And with any excess clay that you guys have, I would just add it back to a pile that you can pop away and wrap it up airtight to save it for another creation that you might end up making. So I've squared off the ends now, so I've got nice flat ends. And I'm just going to measure them again. Still looking pretty big. Might have to trim them again. I'm going to trim them one more time. Okay, so once we've got our 2 C-shaped handles, we're now going to think about adding them onto our Greek vases. So first of all, what you guys might find when you stretch them round into arches, you might get a few little cracks and tears where the clay stretches. So if you do have that, I would just run some water over them just to smooth over those cracks and fill them in. You can also do this on the inside if you've got any stretch marks in there. And now we're going to start to assemble them onto the vase. So first of all, before we fully stick them on, I would just measure in place where you want them to go to see that you're happy with them. So you want to start them from around the top lip of the vase and have them going about halfway up the neck. How do you attach it? We're about to get onto that one, Mark. Okay, so the way that we're going to attach them, this one seems a little bit strange, but first of all, we're going to press the clay on both sides flat. So I'm just squashing it out a little bit flat. And the reason I'm doing this is so that I have a flat surface here and here, which I can just press straight onto the vase. It's already the right shape just to attach straight on. So I'm going to do that with both sides. So I've curled the edges round so the C kind of curls in on itself. And I'm just squashing the 2 edges flat. So both of them, I'm squashing them towards the middle. Sorry. And then I'm going to get some water onto the two flat sides. And I'm also going to place some water on the vase where I want to attach them. So as I was saying earlier, if you want to just measure them up, if they leave a little marking, that's perfect, because then you can see exactly where you measured them to. So I've just run a bit of water onto the places where they're going to attach to. And then you can just gently start to stick them on. And when you stick them on, you can press them in gently. We're going to blend them completely in a second, so it's fine if they still look a little bit messy. But hopefully that bit of clay that you flattened should act as a bit of a base to start blending. So at the moment, I'm just blending with my finger. If you guys have any tools, you guys can get in there and blend it out with the tools. And if using the tools or anything has sort of roughed up the surface, again, I would just use a paintbrush or your finger and just run some water on top of it to smooth it all out and make it look neat again. Okay, so if you guys want to be really, really careful and specific with the blending of the handle into the vase and make sure that it's 100% attached, you can also use the same technique that we used to attach the neck to the base. So you can grab a tiny bit of extra clay and roll it into a really, really, really small little coil, just a tiny coil. And you can pop that above and below the handles. And using some water, you can blend that into the shape. And that's going to make sure that the handle is completely stuck, so you can actually pick it up by the handles if you wanted. You don't have to do this step, but if you don't do it, I would just be careful when it dries of picking it up by the handles, just in case, because they might be quite fragile. So I've added that little extra bit on, and I'm going to blend that in quite delicately to the handle. And whilst you're blending it, I would just make sure you're holding the handle and the neck if you can, just to steady it. You don't want it wobbling all over the place. Okay, so you can do that underneath the handle as well, under here. So I'm going to roll out a tiny little coil again. I'm sorry, can you go over how to attach the handle again? Yeah, of course. So I'm going to attach the second one in a second, actually, so, so you're in luck. I'll just place this under and blend that out, and then I'll show you how to attach the handle again. So once again, to reinforce the handle for everyone that is at this stage, I've put that tiny little coil underneath. I've put lots and lots of water on top, and then I'm just using my tool or your finger or whatever you're using to blend it into the handle and into the pot or the vase, sorry. So once you've got your coil, hopefully you did that step, but if you haven't, I'll go over that again as well. So to roll out the handle, you want to roll out a thin coil that's about 1 centimeter thick, and then you want to make sure you've got two that are equal in size. If one of them's a little bit longer than the other, you can always trim them, and then I'd just line them up onto your pot to make sure that they actually are the perfect size. And then the way that you're going to attach it, first of all, you want to squash the ends down so they're flat and squash them towards each other. So I've just flattened them out I don't know how well it is to see, it kind of looks like a little bridge. So I've got 2 flat edges, and the reason we've got it like that is so that when you press it onto the pot, it just presses flat. It's already flush stuck to the pot. Then you want to get lots of water into the joints so that they stick together. So first of all, when you measure it up, you want to try and leave a little marking. Sorry if that's not so easy to see, I'll spin it around. You want to leave a little marking where you're attaching it, and then you are going to want to just put some water in those 2 places. So the first place is just on the side of the rim, and the second place is about halfway up the neck. And then I'm also putting water onto the flat bits that I've just squashed on my handle. And then I'm going to line the 2 up. Because I've already got one handle on, I do want to make sure that I'm measuring them so that they look a little bit even, at least, hopefully. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then you can start to use these flat bits that you've squashed and blend those into the pot. So you can use your finger for that or the tool. So I'm just going to get in there and blend that together. And then also on the top. And when you're blending the one on the top, I would just reinforce the neck, make sure that you're holding it on the inside so that it doesn't get a bit crushed or misshapen. And then once you've attached it that way, you can do that trick that we used to put the neck on by rolling out a small little coil of clay to just pop into the join and use that to reinforce both sides of the handle. So again, lots of water, and then just gonna flatten it out with my tool. And the same underneath the handle at the bottom. Okay, and as I was saying earlier, if you guys find that when you're blending out the clay, if it looks a little bit messy, the best way of tidying it up is just run some water over it with a paintbrush or with your finger and just smooth over any of the markings or any of the lumps that you might have got from blending the 2 bits together. Right, so if you guys have got to this stage, you've basically finished making the form of the vase. Sorry that it took us a little bit longer than we expected. From here on out, it's basically just a case of smoothing it down, making it look nice and neat. So if I bring this one over here, the difference between these 2 vases is that this one took quite a few hours, whereas this one's obviously taken 1 hour. And so what's been done to this one is just lots of care and attention, smoothing it down with a sponge, smoothing it down with water and things like that. When you leave it to dry, you can come back in a couple hours, as I was saying earlier, and give it another smooth, just to make it look perfect. And then once it's dry, which will take about 2 to 3 days to dry out solid, that's when you guys can go ahead and paint them and decorate them and make them stand out, make them look amazing. So for example, this one, which I'm getting clay all over because my hands are covered in clay, we used the marker pens that we sell to do the really cool sort of ornate decorations. If you have Sharpies at home, anything like that, that's perfect. You can also, if you're quite handy with a paintbrush, you can do that with a paintbrush, but it's quite fiddly, the small details. And then once you've done all your painting and decorating, again, leave it for a couple hours, and then you can pop on the sealant, which is the final step. It dries nice and glossy, and your pieces are completely finished and you're good to go and use them. So yeah, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody for sticking with me for the whole session. Sorry if it was a bit chaotic and rushed. I did want to try and keep it within the time limits, but there was a lot to get done. So, oh yeah, again, so if you guys want to enter our competition for the best vase, what you can do is you can post pictures of them on Instagram and tag us, or TikTok, or whatever you guys prefer using. And you can tag our social media accounts. So Instagram is @Sculpd, and then we can have a flick through and see all of the beautiful vases that you've created and choose a winner. So yeah, so for that, I would try and get as creative as you possibly can. Thank you again, guys, for sticking with me for the whole session. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I hope you have a lovely evening or day, wherever you are in the world. All right, okay, thanks guys. If you have any more questions, you're welcome to email them to us or DM us on Instagram, and we'll get back to you there. Oh yeah, and we have other workshops as well, so look out for those on our socials, so we can get you making some really cool things.